going to regret this.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations. I am just one of your hosts, Matthew Rushing, coming at you from the cloudy planet of Iriadu. Yes, the home of Tarkin. Man, does he have a wonderful mountain fortress or what? And I am so glad as he is with me pretty much, all the time, which I am incredibly blessed that that's the case. Jedi Master John Mills. John, how's it going?
Well, I don't like heights, but I have to give Tarkin credit. Governor Tarkin has created a nice little hideaway here with real redundancy. And something that I think we'll talk about when we get into talking about these two episodes, the final two of season 2, is there some interesting design contrast with some stuff going on that I think is going to be really interesting to get into. But outside of that, I just got to ask, would you want an apartment on the penthouse floor of Tarkin's hideaway?
I'm not going to lie. I feel like it would be pretty beautiful. The skyline going on for miles, mountains surrounding you. It just seems like where eagles fear to tread. But before we dive into the episodes, you can find us all over the place, wherever you're getting your podcasts. And, do us a favor, help us out. Give us a star rating and review wherever you're listening. Share the show out on social media. And, of course, you can follow us on X, Twitter, at The Jedi Masters, as well as the entire network at Join Nerd Party. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. We're online at thenerdparty.com. You can also find us on Instagram at The Nerd Party. So follow us and join us all of those places. But John, we've got the finale basically here for the Bad Batch Season 2. They aired at the same date, The Summit and Plan 99. They were basically a two-parter and or I would just say really one episode. In fact, as we're recording this, we just watched the finale of Season 3, which you'll hear us talk about next week. You're welcome. But I wanted to ask you before we got it, because we saw what they did with Season 3, where it's like a 50-minute episode. Do you wish that this had just been presented, these two episodes, as just one 50-minute episode?
Essentially, it was. By airing both of them at the same time, essentially it was.
Yeah.
That said, the way they cut it, the cliffhanger was amazing at the end of the first episode. Waiting a week between episodes would be interminable. Just because it's just, the first episode, The Summit, ends on literally the type of cliffhanger where you almost fall out of your chair going, wait, no, what's going on here? So I think that the episodes are split the right way. I think that the action is paced the right way. But yes, I think the best cut would have been to just release this as one single episode 15. I would argue that, again, with the advantage of having seen season 3, they understood that with season 3 and they said, one episode, it's fine. Because they could have done the same thing with season 3, but I appreciate what they did here because this is one of those things where I imagine they didn't know that they were going to air them back to back when they made them.
Sure.
So that's a tribute to knowing where to cut the story, that the ending of the first one is so good that, you lean right into it afterward.
Are you sure we wouldn't call this a gondola hanger? Since, that's
Did you workshop that one? Because I feel like Dr. Hemlock came up with that joke. That's the type of joke that you tell when people are being tortured and you just can't escape that joke. That's how I feel about that joke.
I don't actually workshop anything through him anymore. His jokes apparently aren't very funny.
There was the one about the Zillow Beast, but that was tough crowd.
Yeah, exactly. So something I think, especially with the summit, one of the big things here is the fact that we're having this Imperial summit. And we're having all of these divisions come together, talking about all of the biggest projects for this early empire. And, you know, before we get to the fact that you got Project Stardust there, or even what, you know, Hemlock is working on, you know, I think the idea that they're working on things to create a more docile imperial people. Like, part of this research is really basically, how do we lace the water of every single planet so, you know, people are drinking the fluoride, the Star Wars fluoride, and just become more docile and easier to control. And that is just absolutely 100% terrifying, that that's one of the things that they're trying to do as this early empire.
It is terrifying. I think it's also fascinating. I love the bureaucratic stuff. I love the stuff that the prequels were, especially The Phantom Menace, was dragged about the first time it was released. I love the stuff where you find out the inner workings sort of thing. Everybody forgets that the conference room scene on the Death Star in the original Star Wars happened. And it's a bunch of bureaucrats sitting around barking at each other. And we get that here on a very higher level scale, literally higher level, but also figuratively higher level, where you have the people championing their specific projects. And it's anybody who's been in a meeting at work, these meetings like this happen. And what it actually called to mind for me is a more refined and honestly more satisfactory expression of what Kevin J. Anderson tried to create in his Jedi Academy series, where you had the facility at the mall and everybody was sort of like bureaucrats sniping at each other while they're building the Death Star in that version of history. We all know what Tarkin's working on. We know what Krennic is working on. We know what is being worked on by Hemlock, and it's this bickering. And you realize that the Emperor wants this. He wants everybody bickering with each other. He wants everybody striving with each other. But at the same time,
right,
the scene of the summit illustrates, if these idiots could have just worked together, then the Empire would have been unstoppable. It's the very nature of what Palpatine set up that would lead to the fact that the Empire couldn't last longer than 2 decades before it toppled. It basically ate itself from the inside.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that we've talked about many times on the show, but I think you're right. This is why they fail, is because everybody is out for themselves, you know, and they really only care about themselves. They don't really care about the whole, and by not caring about the whole of the Empire, it leads you to this place, and it leads you to the inevitable fall of the Empire. The other thing I really enjoy about this whole thing is there are so many wonderful allusions to, you know, where eagles fear to tread. I believe that's the old war movie. You've got On Her Majesty's Secret Service kind of being referenced here as well. I mean, you've got all of these great movies being referenced to create this episode. And finally getting to see this planet that was, I believe the first big mention of this was in the Tarkin book, which is a part of the newer canon that came out. And to actually get to see Tarkin's home planet for the first time was fascinating. And of course, it made sense to me that it's a planet that's surrounded in fog and storms and clouds. And the only way to get above it is, you know, by building this monstrosity of brutalist architecture, which, you know, just feels perfect for the Empire and for Tarkin, who seems to be overcompensating for something. And so, like, there's just so much about this episode that I love visually, what it's doing for the callbacks to different films that I know. It's a masterclass, I think, in that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that I'm glad you mentioned the architecture, because that's what I was alluding to. Is what's fascinating is Tarkin and Krennic, because, Krennic is there too.
Mm-hmm.
Eriadu is this, like you're saying, stark gray cliffs and very, very tough, brutal environment sort of thing. And so the architecture is very brutalist, and the architecture is very square edges, very sharp angles. But then you have Tantus, where Hemlock is. And Hemlock's whole goal is to subjugate and pervert nature. And where does he operate out of? A beautiful mountain that has an ugly inside. So even those design choices are perfect examples of one of the cardinal rules of Star Wars, which is the design should tell you about the characters you're with in that moment. And, it's why the rebellion, everything looks very beat up and greasy and used and all of that stuff. And you go to the Empire, you go to Cloud City, everything's polished and beautiful. But then even with Cloud City, you go to the inner levels and everything's, again, rough and used and ugly and steam filled and everything like that. And it's like the aesthetic continues. And, the true measure of the aesthetic is, I think that Tarkin's hideaway, his eagle's nest, could not look any other way than it does. It has to. Like, it's about rising higher than and being more powerful and exerting will, which is that sort of Nazi mentality that Tarkin has, whereas there's this internal rot that you don't necessarily see at first and not necessarily reflected outwardly in Hemlock. Hemlock's an unassuming, calm guy, but inside his spirit is foul. And it's just, I think it's a wonderful echo between the two.
One of the things that I was thinking about with this episode as well is, the plan is just outrageous enough to be a Star Wars script, right? Where they have to track down where Hemlock is so that they can track his ship, so they can figure out where he goes. And this really sets up a huge key for season 3, which is wherever he is incredibly well hidden. Very few people know about it. And to get to that information, you basically have to go to the source. At least they are with this. And I love that. And what I also love is that they are interrupted, and the reason they're not successful in their mission is because you run into an early Saw Gerrera who has already started his guerrilla campaign against the Empire. And you can already see here the character that we're going to run into again and again in this series, from this, to Andor, to, of course, what we get in Rogue One, this character who is driven by nothing but his desire for hurting the Empire and for revenge, nothing greater. He says he wants to bring down the Empire, but really he just wants to hurt them. And he doesn't care who he hurts to do it. And I think this was such a great pull for them to show that even very early, Saw was already down this dark path.
Oh, yeah. He already has a big scar across his face and all of that type of stuff.
Yep.
He doesn't have finesse. He's just about smashing things. And I think that it's also great because it instantly establishes, we know that Echo is out there working with Rex. We know the Batch is out there doing their thing, and Gerrera's doing his own thing. And everything sort of goes sideways here because there's no coordination. There's no command structure. These cells operating independently like this, going after their own goals, that in and of itself is an echo of how the bureaucrats in the Empire can't get their act together. And it's really a race to who's going to get their act together first, because that person's going to be able to win, basically. And, I think from clear evidence, the Empire never really gets its act together, and then has micromanagement, which makes it even worse. Whereas the rebellion wins in Return of the Jedi, to quote Lucas himself when he talks about how the interior of their cruiser looks not quite the way we're used to with the Rebels. It is I believe the quote attributed to him is, no. They have their act together now. Like they figured it out. They are working together by this point. And we'll see that happen in Rebels and everything. But yeah, it's it's always a joy seeing Saw Gerrera. I hope that if we continue to get series, especially animated series set in this era, that we continue to encounter Saw, because that's a great character. We know his end, we know his beginning, and we're getting bits and pieces of him in between. I really enjoy this journey. I want to keep taking it. I want to keep seeing it. Like, he's a great tie-in character to pop up every so often.
No, I totally agree with you. And I love your point there about how really this whole process that we're seeing in this time period is the slow realization of those in charge of what will become the rebellion, is that, like you said, if we don't come together, if we don't find a way to work together, we lose. And it's in the ability to work together, which is, I think the beauty of that is that that's also why the Republic ends up falling, is because they stop working together and they start basically bickering like the Empire does. And the only thing that can control that is some megalomaniacal maniac at the top who has enough power to subjugate everyone into his will, right? What we get here is just a beautiful picture of the larger ramifications of just the Star Wars universe in general. And like you're saying, the major theme playing out throughout all of Star Wars, right? Which it's what's stated in episode 1. It's about symbiosis. What happens to one is going to affect the other. And the sooner we learn that, the better. And all of this is kind of playing around with that idea. And so we're kind of like rounding out with the summit itself as an episode. I gotta say, the whole battle sequence that they have on the Sky Tram, or whatever you want to call it, is just so well done. It's just, the cloud structure, the way they're doing all of that. And I think the crazy part about it to me is the way in which you are in this incredibly beautiful environment that's ridiculously deadly. And if you had 2 seconds to look around, you'd just be like, wow, this is beautiful. And yet there's nothing beautiful about it because you're fighting for your life. And I think they do such a good job in this section. And like you said too, just leaving you on that cliffhanger of like, how in the world do we get
I think
out
even
of
before
this?
the fight on the gondola tram thing is when that firefight breaks out, and we see certain camera choices that are done following them around in the hallway, going around and seeing the close quarters stuff, and smartly choosing to find this way to bring in the visual language of more modern action movies into such a way that it looks framed the way like a Star Wars movie should look, as they're rounding corners, as you're getting the surprise people popping around, shooting at people. And I think that then transferring over to the gondola where they're fighting for their lives, shooting forward, shooting backward, and then suspended there as they see the troopers in the other gondola getting out and getting ready to open fire. Like, it's a great tension builder. And that's why you're at the edge of your seat at the end of the episode.
Well, like we've mentioned, we got the cliffhanger and we dive right into Plan 99. And we pick up right where we left off. And I think, it was incredibly shocking for everybody to see that what was going to have to happen, and what does happen, is that Tech has to sacrifice himself to let them get away. And Man, I even rewatching this, it's still just so moving to see this happen. And I think one of the things that makes it so incredibly moving is the choice of it being, Wrecker who can't save him. The bullheaded one who would put himself in danger to save anybody. And he can't do it. And he's, he's the one who's closest to, he's standing next to Omega basically, but he's the one who's closest to this. And just his reaction is so pitch perfect with the way D. Bradley Baker plays it. Oh man, it's still just so incredibly moving, even a year later.
Yeah. It's exactly what the loss of a character should be, is it should leave you oddly empty inside.
Yeah.
You have an emotional attachment. When we were talking about earlier this season when Echo decided to leave and how it hurt this time to see it even a year later, to go, oh, wow. Oh, that stings. That really hurts because you're invested in what's going on. And when Tech falls, it's easy to get complacent and think, nothing's going to happen to a major character like that. I have a friend who I've known him for many, many years. He would hate something like Tech dying because in his worldview, heroes should never die. They should never be taken down. Whereas Tech falling is devastating, but it also illustrates that we as an audience, we've gotten complacent. We've taken for granted that these characters are going to be with us. And it also increases the emotional stakes for Omega because we already know loss is difficult for anybody. And now she's got to deal with this loss. But this is more than like, oh, Echo went off and he's fighting somewhere and you might see him again. This is Tech's gone. That's another piece of heartbreak for this kid. Well, they're struggling to protect her and give her a chance at a normal life, and it's just an impossibility. Yeah, it really does affect. It really hurts, and I agree with you. The way that D. Bradley Baker, he's such the secret weapon of the show. The way he's able to give those vocalizations so distinctly for these characters, so that in a moment like this, I don't hear a voice actor doing a thing. I hear Wrecker.
It's special what they're able to pull off. I think for us, we've been watching Star Wars animation since the beginning, and to see what they're able to pull off, the depth that they're able to give us with these characters and how they're able to make us care about these animated characters they're real people to us, right? They're real characters to us. There's no difference. And so I love it. What did you think of the choice of the way that we move from, the scene, getting off the gondola, the crash, and then getting onto the ship and Omega waking up there on Ord Mantell? What did you think about the way they do that? Because it's, talk about using some more modern action sequence type of ideas. This is definitely one of those places where they really lean into that.
And that's how you grow the franchise. That's how you grow things organically, is you don't make a huge departure. You take moments. Again, going back to the fight in the base in the first episode, we see some camera movements worked in. You know what it reminded me of, honestly, is, and coming from me, this is a huge compliment. What it reminded me of was the way that in the Battle of Geonosis in episode 2, there were some, push-ins, there were some cuts, there were some swipes, there were some, character follow-alongs that, in the context of everything else, right? It's like, oh, I expect this type of shot. I expect this. I expect all these sorts of things. Okay, here's a segment where we're going to play with it and we're going to make it work. But we've couched it in all of this stuff that's familiar to you. So we're just growing it in this increment here. And it makes it work even better because it shows what a conscious choice it is. And so, I thought it was great, obviously.
No, I really enjoyed it, and I thought that they did a excellent job of pulling it off. And I loved it too, because I think one of the things that it helps us remember is the humanity of these characters, especially somebody like Omega, who is so young. And to go through that experience, her young body just can't keep up, right? Like the older clones, they've been through enough so they can push through this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
She just can't. And I think what it does is it brings to mind she's still a very young person. And so I thought it was the perfect choice to help us see that. And again, too, I think it was just really cinematic. And that's one of the things that the animation has very much embraced over the years, is doing the same type of things you would in a film.
Mm-hmm.
You don't treat it any differently. I think that's something that should be praised for these animated filmmakers, because that's what they're doing. And so, especially since, as we talked about, really this is a 50-minute movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really good. We've talked all season in this rewatch about the fact that we're seeing the demise of the relationship with Sid, and this is where it finally falls down. And it was so interesting because there's this weird remorse for the character of Sid, and yet at the same time, it's not enough to care. And it's almost as if, and maybe you'll agree with me, but it's just like it's a show.
Yeah.
Like, I got to pretend like I'm kind of sorry for this, but I'm not really sorry.
I think that they did an incredible job. We talked about this, at different points during the season and everything. They absolutely turned me against Sid very smartly and very efficiently through the season. And her betrayal of them feels so right and inevitable at the same time.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
Right? And but it is one of those things though where it's like Sid was sort of pseudo comic relief in the first season, and then in this season,
right,
she betrays them so badly that, to speak to your point, the show of remorse, you can tell Lando in Empire Strikes Back genuinely he's genuinely remorseful that he's in that situation. He doesn't want to betray Han, but he legitimately doesn't see any other way out.
I mean, you tell Darth Vader no.
Yeah. Sid, people have been warning the batch all season.
Right. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where, yes, I understand the urge to go get Crosshair. Don't leave anybody behind. But man, them being on Pabu, and especially with what happens when Sid betrays them, it's just, you think to yourself, this better be worth it. That's the thought, is this better be worth it? Because look at everything just by making a couple of wrong choices that this led to. And it's,
right.
And you have to sit there and think, is this what Crosshair would want them to do? Obviously not.
But I think, too, the beauty of it is, one, it does show us the people who are willingly going to kind of work with and accept Imperial rule and not really care, because they're going to be able to find a way to navigate this system for their benefit. And, Sid is a great representation of that. At the same time, it also goes to show that just because you do something nice for somebody and go out of your way to help somebody does not mean that everybody is going to reciprocate that type of behavior.
Yep.
And, she owes them big time, honestly, because they have legitimately saved her life before. And yet, again, she doesn't care enough to care. And that's it's a hard thing to swallow, but I think the beauty of it is that it fits with this part of the Star Wars universe as the Empire is slowly kind of leeching the life out of the universe. And on top of that, we get to the point where, we saw Tech be willing to sacrifice himself for his brother so they could survive. And then Omega immediately reciprocates by doing the exact same thing for her brothers, that she will give herself up so they have a chance to live. And, of course, she knows they'll do anything they can to get her back, right? But we end up, her giving herself up and ending up on Tantus and then having the big bomb dropped on us, if there weren't enough bombs in these 2 episodes, that Emery is actually Omega's sister. So she's also a clone. And so it's just one of those things where this season just built up and built up and built up. And then it, like The Empire Strikes Back, it leaves you in this kind of utterly devastated place. And yet having hope that, as Hunter says, we're getting her back or we die trying. And it's really, when you think of a second season and there's just going to only be a third, so you got this trilogy, it's like the pitch perfect ending for this season.
Yeah, it's the perfect end of the second act. Like you said, it's the Empire Strikes Back ending. Omega's not dead, so there's still hope. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I have to believe that there's a chance that they will do it. And of course, we know season 3 is on the horizon here. Honestly, this rewatch of season 2 coming to a close now, I want to go back and probably just rewatch the whole show from the first episode all over again. I mean, this is going to kick me into rewatching season 3 immediately, right? Because we've done this in parallel now. So I'll watch the finale of season 2, go right back into season 3 now that it's done. And then honestly, probably want to go back to season 1 just to get a refresher on how far we've come in terms of how straightforward and simple a concept it probably seemed to so many fans.
Right.
Oh, we're going to see clones and they're going to be going around being like the A-Team. Remember the A-Team stuff that came out in the beginning where somebody, did the A-Team thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I remember.
I grew up watching the A-Team. Thank goodness this was so much more than that. And I honestly... I know we've been going on, but I got to ask you just as a final question. We've now gotten Clone Wars. We've gotten Bad Batch. We've gotten Rebels. I think the argument is that if Disney were wise with its budgeting, it would pull back from live action series and do more animated stuff and just let that team keep building the universe. Even if you're going outside of this time period sort of stuff, I feel more confident about animated projects at this point than others.
I think I feel more confident in animated projects unless the show is specifically, what Favreau and Filoni are doing together.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Even though Mandalorian season 3 was not my all-time favorite, still enjoyed it. Again, in fact, by the end, I think it came together, but yeah, no, I think you're right in that. And, we know as we're recording this and season 3 has ended, we've got Tales of the Empire that's coming out, a little mini series like they did with Tales of the Jedi. I'm with you, man. I think it's incredibly clear to me that they do need to find a place to continue Star Wars animation. And if you ask me, one of the perfect places to place a new show is either sometime before episode 1 or take those 6 years between the end of Return of the Jedi and The Mandalorian and you do an animated show like this, but with Han, Leia, Chewie, Luke, and you see what they're up to.
I agree with both of those, but also knowing that Lucas himself was planning on playing around in this time period that we're still exploring, I'm okay with staying here too, going a few years into the future. Well,
and in that too, I think there's ways to help even connect more with the end of the Bad Batch and to the beginning of what we see in Andor. And so, I agree with you. You got plenty of, so we're rife with opportunities for animation. And so hopefully we will continue to get more Star Wars animation because The Bad Batch season 2 has shown us that, man, it just keeps getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want them to continue to be able to make more shows, because all I'm thinking to myself, wow, how far they've come from the Clone Wars animated movie to now. Think of what they could do in another 10 years.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, John, if people do want to see what else you've got going on and maybe probe the inner workings of the mind of Kessel Junkie, where could they find you?
Well, you can vote for Kessel Junkie 2024 over on X Twitter and see my various campaign musings there. I think I would be a great choice. And you can find me right here on the network co-hosting a show called House Lights, which is a film director podcast where we look at movies, but they're chunked out as, either the complete career of a director or span of work from a director, all sorts of crazy combinations. But Matt, I am but a small ripple in the vast pool of the internet. Where can people find your significant presence out there?
Well, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. You can also find me doing another show here on the network. It's completed. It's called Owl Post, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You can also find me over on the TFM network with a bunch of shows. One is the 602 Club, which is a general geek show talking about all of those franchises we love. John is a frequent guest over there. And in fact, next week is a crossover between Aggressive Negotiations and the 602 Club as we review season 3 of The Bad Batch, so I can't wait. You can also find me doing Warp 5, The Orb, The Artificial Tango, Saddle Up, and sometimes Literary Treks. But as always, just thank you so much for joining us. And John, I'm hearing that they're going to be serving a really nice Nerf steak with a fine Corellian wine. And so I think it's time we go back to the temple and close these negotiations.
Master Rushing, I will opt once again for Wookiee mac and cheese. But for now, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.